Good Sunday evening. Hope you had a wonderful Lord's Day. He is so faithful. I just remember there was snow early in the morning and you hear people doing lawn work. In fact, I just came inside from spreading weed and feed and doing lawn work. So God is so good. And that has something to do with the previous chapter about Noah. Noah's name meant comfort and relief in the midst of your labor and hard work and toil. And I have to ask you today, what did you do that was a Noah that just gave you an outlet where you just enjoyed yourself? I'll tell you a couple of what I did. Had free lunch by the lake, heard encouraging scriptures, music, song, played the piano, worshiped the Lord, did yard work, all that just was a source of encouragement and solace. Amen. And we all need that. So we're talking about Noah in chapter 6, Genesis 6. Did you do anything, Timotheus, that was an outlet for you as far as enjoyment and pleasure?
I napped.
You napped. Hey, sleep, rest, definitely that. But in verse 6, something that chapter 6, all of us want this to be said of ourselves. In verse 8, it says, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. He said, everybody was evil. Everybody was cutting up. God just regretted, repented the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. That's verse 6. But in the midst of all of that confusion and chaos and disappointment and darkness, God was able to find one. I know you want to be that one. I know I want to be that one. I want to stand out. And also in verse 14, I don't know if I still want to take a visit. I know my sister went to Kentucky to see the Ark, the experience, right? And you might have, but that is in verse 14 where God told Noah to make thee an ark, right? And he gave the specifications. And Noah, again, followed God's directions to a T. And we just want to obey him and stay in his favor. And God will be pleased. And in verse 22, and it just pretty much says that, thus did Noah according to all that God commanded him, so did he. And I wanted to be able to say, thus did Michelle according to all that God wanted out of her life. Okay, and Timotheus will take the rest of it.
Earlier in the chapter,
I don't think they could hear you.
Earlier in the chapter, they were talking about how God began to regret making humanity or constructing them because of the way they was living. Mm-hmm. And it said
verse 6.
What did it say?
It says it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart, because every imagination of the thoughts of man's heart was only evil continually. That's verse 5.
Mm-hmm. So maybe that's from the knowledge of good and evil. So since they knew evil, that's all they probably were thinking about. And back then, in the Old Testament times, that's when the Lord was regretful for making humanity. But now it's the New Testament times. The Lord sent his son to die on the cross for us, so we don't really have to worry about that. But now he's probably regretting sending his son to die on the cross. Because a lot of us be living like he did it for no reason. And I know it's just Easter, last week. And people, you can feel the message or whatever. You can watch the Passion. You can hear a sermon, make you cry or whatever. But then the next day, you just go out, do the same thing you was doing the weekend before. So if you're doing that, then it's just all for naught. And I don't want to be the one, to have God regret having his son be sent on the cross, because humanity's already here, so let's use our breath for the right reasons.
Amen. Let's glorify the Lord with the time remaining. Let's not crucify the Lord again. Amen. Well, thank you, and let us all be found faithful in what God has for each one of us. Have a great evening. Enjoy.